Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our first webinar in a four-part series as WICHE celebrates its 70th anniversary, believe it or not. I'm Margo Colalancia. I'm Director of WICHE Student Access Programs, and we're pleased to be here today. Today, we will, in our webinar, explain what WICHE is and how it came to be. We'll also give a brief overview of WICHE's three student access programs, PSEP, WUI, and WRGP. We will highlight this year's enrollment and savings for each program, and we'll give some tips on how to maximize your institution's enrollment in each program. And finally, we'll do a brief analysis of how WICHE's program enrollments align with national enrollment trends and projections of WICHE's publication Knocking at the College Door. Just a few quick housekeeping announcements before we get started. Please enter any questions that come to you in the Q&A box, and we'll address them at the very end. For technical assistance, please contact Cherie Curtin via chat or at the coordinates provided in the welcome message. And please note that the webinar is being recorded, and we'll send you the link in about 24 hours. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Kate Springsteen and Peace.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I am Kate Springsteen, and I serve as the Assistant Director for Student Access Programs at WICHE.
Hi, I'm Peace Bransberger, Senior Research Analyst in the Policy Unit at WICHE, and part of the team that produces the high school graduate projections and demographic work we do.
Thank you, Kate and Peace, for being with us today. So before we dive into the student access programs, let's take a step back and answer, what is WICHE? WICHE stands for the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. We're a nonprofit agency, a regional compact of the Western states. And we were established in 1953, believe it or not, that's where we got our 70 years, right? To help Western states share their limited higher education resources. Just want to mention too, there are three other regional compacts in the United States. WICHE was the second one created. So the very first of the sister compacts are SREB, the Southern Regional Education Board, which was founded in 1948 in Atlanta, and it's located in Atlanta. WICHE was founded, as I mentioned, in 1953. We're located out of Boulder, Colorado. And then the third compact is the New England Board of Higher Education in Boston, and that was founded in 1955. And then the baby of our compact families is MEC, the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. It was founded in 1991 and is located in Minneapolis. Here's a map of the WICHE region. WICHE has a long-standing track record of providing students in the Western states affordable higher education options. We partner with our members, and we share higher ed and their higher education institutions located in their states to share knowledge, create resources, and develop innovative solutions to share or to address our region's needs. Our WICHEs, as you can see on the map, our WICHE membership stretches from the Dakotas, all as far west as Hawaii and Alaska, and even further west to the US Pacific Territories and freely associated states of CNMI, Guam, the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau. WICHE states and its Pacific Island members pay annual dues that fund WICHE's core services, and that includes our student programs. In addition to our student programs, some of WICHE's other services and initiatives include extensive higher education policy research, hence our presence of our colleague today, Peace Bransberger, who works extensively on the projections for high school graduates. We also have the Western Cooperative for Educational Telecommunications that focuses on digital learning. And we also have a unit that does workforce development in behavioral health. So we have many different initiatives, but those are just the big ones, to name a few. So now let's talk about WICHE student access programs, which really are WICHE's true legacy and have withstood the test of time since the beginning of the organization. So our student programs allow Western residents to study out of state, but within the Western region at a reduced cost. We've got 3 student programs, as I mentioned, PSEP, WUI, and WRGP, and these really are a triple win for all involved. So students and their families save money and have a lot more choice, different majors available outside of their state that they might not have in their home state. And they can also, if they just want to get out of their state and grow personally a little bit, they could go study out of state. Our schools, our universities and community colleges optimize their enrollment and student services infrastructures. They can, for example, fill niche majors, but they might not have their own population within the state. Their residents might not be enough to fill those majors, but with some students coming in from surrounding states, they can maximize their enrollment. They can also maximize student housing, for example. And then our member states and territories get to educate their workforce for less and avoid duplication of specialized programs that maybe their small populations could not support. So the Professional Student Exchange Program, PSEP, is WICHE's oldest program, as I mentioned, established in 1953. So we're celebrating our 70th birthday along with WICHE. And here's how we kind of this program came to be. After World War II, the West realized that many of its states in the region, especially the less populated ones, lacked the higher ed infrastructure needed to educate physicians, dentists, veterinarians, et cetera. So the have states agreed to share their healthcare programs with the have-not states. And in return, the have-not states agreed to pay the cooperating programs a per student fee to reduce the non-resident students' tuition costs. So today, PSEP currently offers students 10 different options in the professional healthcare fields. We also have 2 regional student savings programs, the Western Undergraduate Exchange, or WUI. It was established in 1988, and it's America's largest graduate tuition savings program. And when Kate tells you more about its enrollment, you'll understand why it's the biggest. Also, WRGP, or the Western Regional Graduate Exchange, was established in 1981. It's very similar to WUI, but for graduate students, and Kate will share more in a bit. So this year, our 3 programs combined served almost 50,000 students, which is pretty amazing. And even more amazing is that they saved $583 million in tuition, which is pretty phenomenal. We couldn't do this without our 220 plus partner universities and community colleges. So right now, I want to extend a big shout out and thank you to all of our collaborators and our states that fund the students and send and enroll students in our programs. Thank you to all of you. So let's talk a little bit more about PSEP in detail, but before we do that, I want to put a face to the program. Heather is one of our new students. She's from CNMI. She's preparing her physician assistant master's at the University of Washington. And CNMI is one of our newest funding partners. They have been supporting students in our program for about 5 years now. And I also want to put a shout out to Guam, who will begin supporting students through PSEP as of fall of 2024 and possibly earlier. So we're excited to have them to serve their students as well. So for PSEP, as far as our enrollment and savings, we served 559 students this year, and they saved more than $14.2 million in tuition. And that was basically their home state or territory's investment to help them buy down their tuition. The student savings varies between about $9,000 and $34,000 a year, depending on the student's field of study. And I'll show you a little bit more detail on that in just a minute. If you look at our map here, you can see this year's enrollment by state and also by investment. So we have 10 PSEP funding states, plus the CNMI invested $14.2 million. And the most popular fields, veterinary medicine, optometry, and dentistry. And as far as states that enroll the greatest number of students through PSEP, those would be Arizona, Montana, and Wyoming. The gray states on the map don't fund students through PSEP, but they are still very important to us because they enroll many of our students in their home state programs. For example, Washington and Oregon and Idaho, California, South Dakota all have PSEP programs where they enroll students in different healthcare professions that we serve. Next, I'd like to show you just a quick chart, and this has got a lot of detail to it, but I just want to show you all the different healthcare fields that we are currently funding in. This could expand in the future. The states that support in those particular fields, and then the fee schedule, this current year's fee schedule, and then for the next 2 years. Typically, a state will decide to fund students in a healthcare field if there is no public in-state option for that field in the home state. One last map here I'd like to share with you is every 5 years, WICHE and its PSEP funding states measure the number of PSEP graduates who return home and practice in their profession. So there are 10 PSEP funding states plus CNMI, as I mentioned earlier. The dark blue states don't require PSEP graduates to return home and serve. So there's basically honor system states where they're encouraged to return, but not legally obligated. And these states are Alaska, Montana, North Dakota, and Utah. And they average on average, they have about a 55% return rate for their graduates when measured in the last 10 years. The gold states, the majority of our PSEP funding states do require PSEP graduates to return home and practice in their profession. They are Arizona, CNMI, Colorado, Hawaii, Nevada, New Mexico, and Wyoming. And typically they'll require that the graduates provide 1 year of service for every year of funding that they received. And if they don't come back and serve, or they serve for less time, then they are required to reimburse the state the support fees put forward for their education. The return for service states see a greater number of students returning home, 80% on average. And if we combine all our states, the overall graduate return rate for our PSEP states is about 69%. One final slide, and if you're from a cooperating program and with us today, here are some tips on how to increase the number of PSEP students that you enroll. So first of all, focus your program recruitment efforts in states that support in your field. If you go back to that chart, and we actually have a similar chart on our website that you can consult and find out exactly which states fund in your field that you offer. And tell prospective students, even when they're in the early application stages, about PSEP, and tell them early. We also have a link that we're going to put in the a link we're going to give you that is a link to the state and territory applications for students. So they should apply directly to their home state. Also connect with pre-health advisors in the states that support in your field. And WICHE staff interfaces with the Western Association of Advisors for the Health Professions. So we try and do that as well, but it's good that if you all work through that organization or connect with the pre-health advisors separately. Admissions staff, tell your prospective applicants to apply to their home state office early. Again, priority consideration is October 15th, the year prior to enrollment. And the applicants must meet the home state's residency criteria, and that varies. Some states require just a year. Other states, you have to have graduated from a high school in the home state or have up to 5 years of residency required to be eligible to be considered for funding. And please do remember that even though funding is never guaranteed, just because they successfully apply to their home state, it's always worth applying. I mean, that's a huge, huge buy down of potential student debt if you get funded. Finally, link your program's financial aid and scholarship web pages to wiche.edu/PSEP, and just to get additional exposure and get the word out. Now I'll hand the mic over to Kate Springsteen, WICHE's Assistant Director of Student Access Programs, and she'll tell us a little bit more about WUI and WRGP. Kate?
Thanks, Margo. So I'm going to be talking about the Western Undergraduate Exchange and the Western Regional Graduate Program, along with some of the data that you'll find in this year's By the Numbers report for these programs. So starting with the Western Undergraduate Exchange, or WUI as we call it, this is the largest regional interstate tuition savings program in terms of enrollment and estimated savings. It's been around since 1988. There are over 162 and 4-year institutions that participate. These are public schools only. Private schools are ineligible to participate in WUI. Through WUI, students can earn certificates, associate's degrees, and bachelor degrees. And participating institutions agree to charge WUI students no more than 150% of resident tuition. Schools set their own requirements for WUI eligibility, including which majors are eligible, what academic requirements students must meet, and if there's a separate application that students need to fill out. For the current academic year, WUI saved 46,110 students, more than 520 million in tuition savings. The average savings per student was $11,294. Over the past 5 years, WUI enrollment has increased by 15%, from 40,487 students in 2018 to 46,110 students during this academic year. During that same time, the savings has increased by nearly 37%. Our By the Numbers report breaks down the WUI enrollment by sending and receiving state. So here is this enrollment summary table showing how many students from each WICHE state or jurisdiction are using WUI in another WICHE state or jurisdiction. We can see that California sends the most students at nearly 19,000 students this year. WUI can really be seen as a relief valve for the state of California. On the right-hand side of the table, we can see how many students each WICHE state or jurisdiction is taking in. The states that received the most WUI students this year are Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, Idaho, and Utah. In our report, we also include state pages for each of the WICHE states and specific jurisdictions. These pages include maps showing the number of students coming from and going to a particular state. In this example here, we can see that the state of Arizona sent nearly 1,900 students to another WICHE state and is enrolling 6,600 students from other WICHE states and jurisdictions. If you haven't already, I encourage you to review your state pages in our By the Numbers report. And we have a similar map for WRGP on these pages as well. We are also able to look at WUI enrollment by the sending state and receiving institution. The image here is an excerpt of this. This chart helps us see at a more granular level where students are going to within each state. So I mentioned a moment ago that Arizona has some of the highest numbers of WUI enrollment. And looking at the data here, we can see that this is largely driven by Northern Arizona University. By far, NAU enrolls the most number of WUI students within the state of Arizona. We have over 160 institutions, so I'm unable to show all of them here, but we'll share this link along with a link for the WRGP enrollment by state and institution in our email that we'll send out later. WRGP is the equivalent of WUI at the graduate level. So again, schools agree to charge WRGP students no more than 150% of resident tuition, and schools are able to determine which majors are eligible for this rate, along with what the requirements are for students to receive this discounted rate. More than 60 institutions now participate in WRGP. During this academic year, 3,269 students are using WRGP for a total savings of $58 million. On average, students are saving $14,703 per year. And some of the most popular WRGP majors are public health, law, speech language, audiology, and business administration. Like WUI, we also include an enrollment summary table for WRGP. And again, California is sending the most students. In fact, about a third of all of the WRGP students are California residents. On the other hand, on the other side of the table, we can see that the state of Colorado enrolls the most WRGP students, and about a third of all the WRGP students are studying in the state of Colorado. There has been a steady increase in the number of students using WRGP since 2018. More than 300 graduate students are using WRGP this year compared to the previous year, which marks an increase of 11%. And we can really look at two policy changes that have contributed to this growth. First, WICHE no longer requires graduate programs to be distinctive in order to participate. This requirement was discontinued in 2018. And the second policy change is in regards to the tuition multiplier. Starting with academic year 2019, schools were allowed to charge WRGP students 150% of resident tuition. And prior to that, schools were allowed to charge students exactly resident tuition. So the combination of these two policies has led to this steady increase in the number of eligible WRGP majors, which has tracked alongside the growth of WRGP students. Since 2018, there has been a 96% increase in the number of eligible majors and a 121% increase in the number of WRGP students. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about how we calculate our enrollment and tuition savings. This goes for both WUI and WRGP. We have school administrators who submit the enrollment numbers for the number of WUI and WRGP students from a particular WICHE state or territory studying in a particular major, and this is run through our Salesforce administrative portal. When we collect the enrollment numbers, we are collecting for the fall only, and we have a 100% response rate. There are a couple of limitations on the data that we collect. First, we are only looking at the total number of award recipients. So we don't distinguish between new and continuing students. And we are unable to track persistence because of this. We also don't collect any demographic information on students, so we are unable to see what impact WUI has on race, ethnicity, or students from rural areas. The data for our WUI and WRGP tuition rates comes from WICHE's annual publication of tuition and fees in the WICHE region. This is a great resource for counselors. It's produced by WICHE's policy unit and is published every November of the current academic year. And we'll also include this link to it in the email that we send out after this webinar. So here are some examples of savings estimates for WUI institutions. We post the savings estimates for all of our WUI and WRGP institutions on their WUI and WRGP savings finders. Something to note here is that the estimates are based on standard programs. There may be special programs that have a higher tuition, for example, in engineering or nursing, but the WUI tuition multiplier that a school will use, which again is up to 150% of resident tuition, will be consistent across all programs. And here are some tips for increasing WUI and WRGP enrollment at your school. So the first thing, and it might seem quite obvious, but make sure that you have WUI and WRGP information on your school's website. I want to make sure it's easily accessible and not hidden. And on these pages include information about what the requirements are, what majors are eligible, and who a student should contact for more information. Another option is to add more eligible majors. And then finally, you'll want to keep your WUI and WRGP savings finder profiles up to date. These profiles show each school's WUI or WRGP requirements. They include links to applications. They list which majors are eligible and who to contact at your school. There's also a contact, or I have a campus representative contact me form. These web pages are very, very popular. In fact, they have the highest viewership of all of WICHE's web pages. And we as WICHE staff get calls and emails daily in which we point students and parents to these savings finder profiles. Each June, we do ask the schools to update their profiles, but they can be updated at any time throughout the year. Each school has what we call a profile editor. They have access to our Salesforce administrative portal in which they can make updates to your profile. So I will be sending links to the WUI and WRGP Savings Finder, and I encourage you to take a look at these if you haven't already to see what's on your school's profile. And now I would like to reintroduce our colleague, Kate Bransberger, for some analysis and commentary on how the Student Access Program enrollments align with national enrollment trends and predictions. Keith, our listeners are really typically familiar with the data that WICHE has been issuing for 40 years, but can you point out how we can access this information? What are the big takeaways you think we should know about, and recent and future college age populations?
Hi, thanks, Kate. Yeah, and just to make sure, even if folks are familiar with it, let me just mention, Knocking at the College Door is the series name for our high school graduate projections. We make them roughly every 4 years. And as you mentioned, it's been more than 40 years since the first edition. Our latest edition was the 10th, which we issued in December of 2020. And so I'll speak to trends from that. The trends of which, if you are familiar with this, really have borne out edition to edition, largely just in terms of major population trends. I put a link in the chat to the state profiles because the folks on your call here today are most likely to be interested in state by state trends for the states that are of most interest to them. So I'd suggest people go there and browse through those data, since there can be significant variation by state. And then I'm also putting a link to a slide deck that I'm not doing slides today because we're not going to get too deep in the weeds on the data, but a link to a slide deck that we have posted on our website for this publication that gives you hopefully an at-a-glance view and some convincing information about the trends. If you look at nothing else, I think slides number 14, 8, and 9, only 3 of the ones that are there, really give a sense of the big picture. How I describe that big picture is that prior to the pandemic, the demographic, meaning, just population, overall population and graduation trends that suggested that there would be continued stability in the number of high school grads in the Western region through about 2026, keeping in mind we're in March of 2023. So for the next couple of years, with a couple of years projected to have no growth in number, and a few years showing 1 to 2% growth. So recently it's been averaging about 1% growth in high school graduates annually. If that's consistent with what we're seeing with WUI or you're seeing at your colleges, then that seems like you're tracking those overall trends. After 2026, so just in a couple of short years, the number of high school graduates in the region is overall predicted to trend downward, with high school graduate numbers decreasing about 1% on average for each of the years in the decade between 2026 and 2036. So again, from what I've seen and what you've spoken to, the WUI trend seems generally consistent with regional high school graduate production, and as well the evolving COVID college enrollment picture. I couldn't really comment on each of the WUI state or institutions trends for time's sake, but also because each of the states, any of the programs that you host, their trends are really going to reflect a range of circumstances beyond just sheer student availability numbers. However, I would speculate that the WUI institutions, at least, might expect a somewhat more positive enrollment situation than the overall average across the country or for the region. Primarily, I'd say that because you're presumably attracting some of the most college-bound students. And those college-bound students, even with COVID, we've seen that it really hasn't appeared to budge their enrollment types of patterns nearly as much as some of the other students. On the other hand, despite the possibility for a more positive picture, I would say the reducing high school graduate classes that will start those numbers, reducing numbers in the next couple of years, I'd expect that institutions in the West may experience increased competition for the more mobile and determined students that you presumably attract, both from within the region and from outside of the region. And that could definitely change the dynamic for students who would be considering WUI. So I'd rest easy in a sense, but I'd really be looking at kind of strategic and sort of tactical ways to continue to be a premier program for students in the West.
Thanks. Are there particular things that you think we should consider from the COVID era?
So things to consider, I could probably not even cover that in a book at this point, but putting another link in the chat to a recent analysis that we did where we're trying to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening. So if there's some overall narrative change from what the projections already suggested, which were, expect some reduction in younger students. What we found recently was recent and near future high school graduates. There's growing evidence that there could be possible declines, or you might expect, I would say, as an overall profile, some declines in their post-secondary preparation. And that's even among the students who received a high school diploma. Again, it may or may not bear specifically on the smallish subset of WUI students because they are the higher, I wouldn't say higher performing, they're definitely determined and maybe had a college path in mind, but it's not unreasonable to think that even those students miss some content or mastery in high school because that's what the information is suggesting. I'd suggest that you be connected to the information from the states that matter most for your students about states' graduation policies. And in some cases, they waived some of the graduation policies that were pushing the standard up for high school graduates, and about other known learning impacts. For example, in the middle school grades and the high school grades of recent years. Those middle schoolers in particular saw some of the deepest impacts on their learning, and they'll be coming out of the pipeline in like 3 to 4 years. I have a 9th grader, I know. So these impacts on the K-12 population's proficiency and frankly, their overall well-being, they're just overall trending negatively. So it could potentially amplify graduate decrease as in the coming years. That would happen if more students on whole just drop out due to course or grade failure, or from personal or socio-emotional reasons. And that's speaking about just getting out of high school. It doesn't even speak to what we've seen with the enrollment trends for students and their likelihood of attending college compared to what we knew before. There was also something that might be worth considering is a shifting of the portion of students who moved between public, private, and homeschooling. It was evidenced the most in the elementary grades and to some extent in the middle school grades, and it really varies by state and area, but in some places it could mean that a greater portion of coming high school graduates might apply for WUI with something other than a public high school history or transcript, if that's what you're more familiar with seeing. And there's not a lot of data about what that's going to mean, but homeschooled kids, as they get into the high school content, that might be something to think about. Would you see more applications from homeschooled students?
Got it. Thanks so much, Peace. I'm wondering on balance, how you would summarize the last year for WUI compared to undergraduate trends more broadly.
Sure. As you've mentioned for a couple of reasons, you can't find the exact comparison point for WUI or from your given programs to the National Student Clearinghouse data, which are the most recent about the post-secondary enrollment trends. But I'll mention a few of the trends that caught my eye that sort of overlap with the WUI report timeframe from fall 2020 to fall 2021 to 2022, excuse me. So nationally, undergraduate public four-year enrollment fell 1.4% over that time period, which was about 88,000 students. And by 2022, fall 2022, it was down a total of 4% from fall 2019. So again, if WUI over the last couple of years has increased, and most recently in this year, then that would suggest you're doing somewhat better. Undergraduate enrollment at public four-year institutions in the West, not considering Wyoming or Pacific, which weren't in these data, fell slightly in fall of 2022. So again, WICHE seems to have done somewhat better. And then by fall of 2022, however, the Western four-year undergraduate enrollment was still down about 1% from fall 2019. So, you know, the bigger story we hear, of course, is about what's gone on with community college enrollments. But there were actually some changes in the undergraduate enrollment of four-year students in the West, and WICHE seems to have, if not bucked the trend, sort of stayed somewhat above the going rate of decrease.
Got it. And what about post-baccalaureate trends?
You know, that gets even one level deeper in terms of how to generalize, you know, because, you know, with your graduate programs in particular, it's going to be far more specialized. And so that reflects any number of things, labor markets, you know, student aspirations and what they graduated with, any number of things that are not as sort of painted with it as broad a stroke as undergraduate enrollments. Nonetheless, the fall 2022 Student Clearinghouse data indicated that graduate enrollment decreased by 39,000 students, or 1.2% by fall of 2022. And that was after 2 consecutive years of strong growth, which I think we'd been hearing about. So the most recent sort of started trending a little differently for graduate students. So the US graduate market did prove somewhat more resilient through the pandemic, but if this last year were any indication, it might suggest that that trend, you know, might change. And I couldn't even speculate about whether it will or not, and what the reasons would be. As regards to kind of getting a little bit more specific, and then this may have something to do with your, you know, as institutions think going forward about the programs that they participate in and are key to their participation in your programs. Analysis that I've seen about graduate programs highlight that computer science is ascending among some of the top programs, and that's been a pretty consistent ascendance, if you will. Now, I'm sure we've all heard about, you know, some of the industry layoffs and what have you, and whether that will affect graduate student trends in the future. Unclear, but from a lot of different angles, the computer sciences and that sector of the economy, I mean, it's ubiquitous across jobs, and so that shows strong holding. There's growing industry demand for professionals in certain disciplines, such as education, you know, the teacher shortages and need for teachers that we hear about, and health, of course. But recent student declines in those enrollments in the graduate level. So it remains to be seen whether the growth and the demand continues and how it matches up with student enrollment, both in terms of, you know, it's really complicated for why or why not some of the students coming out of the undergraduate pipeline might continue to pursue that. Pandemic increased demand for online degree programs. So I don't know how that factors for your programs, but it may be something to be thought about if a growing number of students are going to have an expectation for that. How does it really weigh with what you offer and your institution's offer? And then, of course, there's the uncertainty with the international student trend, where there's swift contraction and maybe really not a strong resumption just yet. And how would that factor with your graduate programs and their overall kind of enrollment strategies, and how therefore the graduate programs that you offer factor into that overall equation?
This was great. Thank you so much for being here today and helping us develop a better understanding of the changing enrollment trends that we're seeing at all levels of higher education. And thank you for giving our partner institutions just some insights as to how they might plan to maintain and grow enrollment over time. So thank you again for being here. We always appreciate our collaboration with PEACE and the policy unit. Thank you, PEACE. So we were going to answer some questions. I don't see any in our Q&A box, or none that haven't been answered already. We will be forwarding you the slides and a link to the recording. Do we have any other questions right now that anybody wants to type into the Q&A box right now, right away? Just give you guys a moment. And if you have any questions, we do have Kate, do you want to show the slide with our contact information? If you have anything that occurs to you later and you want to shoot us an email, please do so, and we'll respond as quickly as possible. Okay, I don't see any questions right now, so we'll go ahead. Thank you all for being here. Thank you again. A big shout out to our collaborators. We would not be in business